The deeper we walked, the more the forest rearranged itself. At first, it was subtle enough to dismiss. A bend in the land that didn't match our memory. A cluster of trees closer together than they'd been minutes earlier. Small inconsistencies that could be blamed on fatigue, on poor light, on the way deep woods flattened distance and warped perspective. We told ourselves that old forests had no obligation to be navigable. There were no trails here. No markers, no blazes, no signs of recent human presence. Just uninterrupted forest, thick trunks, tangled roots, and a canopy so dense it pressed the sky into fragments. Our phones had lost signal hours ago. The compass needle drifted, twitching as if unsure where north was supposed to be. It was cold in a quiet way. Not biting, not sharp, just persistent. Each breath left a pale cloud that hung longer than it should have before dissolving. The air smelled of damp soil and bark, layered with something older, deeper, like leaves that had never fully decayed. There were 3 of us. Jonah walked ahead, trying to keep a steady heading. Mara followed, stopping often to look back, to compare. And I stayed behind them, watching the forest more than the path we pretended existed. We'd been walking for hours when Mara stopped. "Wasn't that tree back there?" she asked. She pointed to a massive cedar ahead of us, its trunk split low, its roots bulging above the soil like knuckles. I recognized it immediately, the shape, the way one root curved inward like a hooked finger. "Yes," I said slowly. "We passed it already." Jonah frowned. "No, we've been going straight." He turned, scanning behind us. Another split-trunk cedar stood there too. Same size, same shape, same hooked root. The forest was silent as we stared, waiting for wind or birds or anything that might explain it. Nothing came. Even the leaves seemed reluctant to move. "Coincidence," Jonah said, too quickly. "Old growth does that. Patterns repeat." We kept walking. The ground beneath our boots felt wrong. Not unstable, but adjusting. Roots shifted slightly as we stepped, pressing up through the soil, then settling again once we passed. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. I felt it more than I saw it, a faint resistance like the forest testing our weight. Fog crept in as the light thinned. It didn't roll or drift the way fog should. It lingered low, pooling between trees, thinning when we approached and thickening behind us, closing sight lines we just passed through. After another hour, we reached a fallen log spanning a shallow dip in the land. Its bark was pale, almost silver, stripped smooth by time. Mara stopped dead. "We crossed this already." Jonah shook his head, but his voice wavered. "No, that one had mushrooms on it." We climbed over anyway. 10 minutes later, we reached the same log. This one had mushrooms. The silence pressed closer after that. No insects, no birds. Our footsteps sounded muffled, as though absorbed by the forest floor. When Jonah snapped a twig in frustration, the sound didn't echo, simply vanished. The fog began to move with us, not following, adjusting. When we slowed, it thickened ahead, forcing us to push through. When we hurried, it thinned, revealing just enough space to keep us going, always forward, always deeper. The trees began to repeat. Not identical copies, but close enough that memory stumbled over itself. A bent birch appeared twice, then 3 times. A cluster of pines arranged in a perfect triangle showed up at regular intervals, no matter which direction we turned. Mara started counting steps under her breath. Jonah stopped trusting his compass entirely. I stopped trusting my sense of time. At some point, none of us could say when, we realized the forest was responding. When we spoke loudly, branches creaked overhead, tightening the canopy, dimming the light. When we whispered, the fog crept closer, muffling sound further. When we tried to mark trees with shallow cuts, we found the marks later, fresh and wet, on trunks we hadn't touched. The forest wasn't random. It was reorganizing. We reached a small clearing near dusk, or what passed for dusk beneath the canopy. The space felt wrong immediately, too round, too contained. The ground dipped inward slightly, like a shallow bowl. This wasn't here before, Jonah said. Mara turned in a slow circle. It was, but smaller. The trees around the clearing leaned inward, their roots thick and exposed, slowly encroaching. I could have sworn one of them shifted while I watched, bark grinding softly against soil. We tried to leave the clearing. Every direction led us back to its edge. Paths appeared briefly, narrow gaps between trunks, only to close once we committed to them. The fog funneled us gently but firmly back into the center, like hands guiding without touching. Night arrived without warning. The forest grew impossibly quiet. Even our breathing felt intrusive. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the clearing's shape more clearly. It wasn't a clearing. It was a space being made. Mara sat down hard. "It's not trapping us," she said. "It's arranging us." Jonah stared at the leaning trees. For what? The ground shifted beneath our feet, just enough to feel. Roots pressed upward, forming low ridges that nudged us closer together. The canopy overhead tightened, branches overlapping until only a dim circle of sky remained. Understanding came slowly, like cold seeping into bone. The forest wasn't hostile. It was efficient. Every loop, every repeated tree, every vanished path had served a purpose. Reducing uncertainty, narrowing options, learning how we moved, how we reacted, where we hesitated. It wasn't trying to keep us out. It was preparing space. The fog thickened one last time, settling around us like breath held too long. Somewhere deep beneath the soil, something shifted, vast, deliberate. The trees leaned closer, and the forest finished rearranging itself. We found carvings on the trees that hadn't been there minutes earlier. I said it under my breath, not to be overheard, but because the forest seemed to notice words spoken aloud. Even saying it felt like inviting attention. There were no trails here, no blazes, no evidence that anyone had passed through in years, maybe decades. The forest was unbroken, ancient, its trunks rising straight and silent, roots twisting into ridges that made every step precarious. The ground was damp and dark, soaking boots and socks, smelling of earth and moss and decay that had long refused to vanish. Above, the canopy pressed together so tightly it shredded the sky into gray shards, flattening time into something that moved sideways rather than forward. Our phones had gone useless hours ago. No signal. No GPS batteries dimmed inexplicably. Even the compass needle twitched, then swung back and forth as if questioning the very notion of north. Each breath fogged the air, lingering longer than it should, curling in spirals that seemed to stretch toward the trees and vanish. Silence here wasn't empty. It pressed like wet cloth against skin, filling every gap where noise should exist. There were three of us. Eli, confident but restless, walking ahead with a careful pace that tried to mask unease. Clara, constantly scanning shadows, her steps light but deliberate, watching both the path and what lurked just beyond. And me, Andrew, bringing up the rear, feeling every tree trunk, every knot in the roots, as though the forest were testing me with each careful footfall. We noticed the first carving entirely by accident. Clara froze, pressing a gloved hand against a maple we had just passed. That wasn't here. I stepped closer. The mark was shallow but precise, a vertical line crossed by 3 short slashes. Sap had already begun to bead along the cuts, pale and glistening in the dim light that filtered through the canopy. Eli shrugged. Probably old. Hard to see unless you catch the light right. I shook my head. I touched this tree minutes ago. There was nothing. The forest responded by holding its breath. No wind stirred. No leaves rustled. Even the fog seemed to freeze mid-air, clinging to the undergrowth like it had a will of its own. We moved on, uneasy, glancing back too often, half expecting movement that never came. Minutes passed, then Clara gasped. Another carving appeared on an ash tree ahead. The symbol was identical, the vertical line now crossed with 4 short slashes. "That's new," she whispered. Eli's confident posture faltered. "There's nobody else here." But there were no footprints, no snapped twigs, no smoke, No scent of human presence. Nothing. The silence pressed closer, becoming almost physical. Our footsteps seemed to vanish into the soil the instant they landed. When Eli snapped a branch in frustration, the sound disappeared immediately, as if the forest swallowed it whole. The carvings multiplied, growing bolder and more deliberate. At first they were simple, lines, spirals, crosses, but then they began to reflect us. An arrow pointed the way we were already walking. A shallow etching spelled "stopped here" after we paused to check a route, damp bark splitting slightly to accommodate the cuts. We tried photographing the carvings, but Clara's phone died mid-frame. Black, blank, refusing to turn on again. "They're following us," she said, voice trembling. I shook my head, unease coiling in my chest. "No, they're not following. They're recording." The forest adjusted. Branches overhead shifted subtly, tightening the canopy. Roots pressed upward beneath our boots, nudging us forward without a hand touching us. The fog moved with purpose, thickening where we lingered, thinning when we walked faster, always corralling us deeper. Then we saw our names, carved into a pine we hadn't passed. Couldn't have passed before. Eli, Clara, Andrew, sap glistening like wet ink. Clara pressed a hand over her mouth. Eli took a step back, shaking his head. "No, this isn't real." I felt it, a slow, sinking certainty. It's not copying us. It's reading us. The carvings accelerated. Symbols became words. Words became phrases. Each one described us. Fell when Clara tripped over a root. Hesitated when Eli paused at a gnarled trunk. Looked back when I scanned the shadows too long. The trees began repeating. A split oak appeared twice, then 3 times, each bearing new carvings tracking our every movement. Paths opened briefly, then closed as soon as we committed to them, forcing us deeper into the forest's heart. Dusk fell abruptly. The fog lifted slightly, revealing a small clearing that had not existed when we passed this direction minutes earlier. It was too round, too contained, the ground shaped subtly like a shallow bowl. Roots pressed upward beneath our boots, guiding us toward the center. The trunks leaned inward, enclosing the space, almost forming walls. "This isn't a clearing," Clara said softly. "It's being made." The carvings continued, appearing in real time. Letters split the bark above our heads. "Stay. Remember." The ground vibrated faintly, subtle shifts through the roots beneath our feet, guiding us closer together. Every sound we made seemed amplified, then swallowed immediately by the dense, expectant forest. I realized then that the forest wasn't marking trees for us. It was marking us, using the trees as ledger, memory, record. Every step, every pause, every glance, etched into living wood. Not a warning, not a threat, preparation. Above us, on a trunk too high to reach, a carving began to form slowly, deliberately. Letters split the bark, sap beating as the word took shape. We couldn't finish reading it before the fog thickened again, rolling in like it had a mind. The trunks leaned closer. Shadows lengthened, folding over each other. The carvings multiplied faster, flowing across trunks like a language we could not yet understand. And then we understood we were not alone. Not in the way of another creature, not in the way of another human. We were inside the forest's mind, and it was recording everything we were, everything we did. Every hesitation, every misstep, every breath was noted in bark and sap. The carvings were not random. They were patient, deliberate, alive. It was preparing us. We didn't know for what, but we knew that once the forest had finished marking, we might no longer be able to leave. And so we walked on, deeper into the carvings, deeper into the forest's record.